And now we celebrate a woman who influenced her corner of Wyoming. Jane Ivinson came to Laramie when it was still a hell on wheels town. That was in 1868 when she was a new wife and new mother. She became a driving force in domesticating and growing what is now the home of the University of Wyoming. The executive director of the Laramie Plains Museum believes that if it weren't for the Ivinsons, Laramie might well have become a ghost town.
I have been so interested in this topic. Now, Jane Ivinson, May 1868, arrives from the very cultured city of Memphis, Tennessee to Laramie, into the tracks town. The railroad had just arrived here. What did she see and what did she think?
She was shocked. We do know that because we have a letter that Mr. Ivinson, Edward, her husband, wrote to his brother, and he says in that letter that Jane was rather shocked when she saw the vast prairies.
It was a tent town.
It was a tent town, and she knew that it was a frontier hamlet, and she was going to have to make something of it. So it was a vast prairie, the mountains in the east, that really, she was enchanted by those. And but it was a vastness that was new to her.
So what did she see when she arrived?
Tents. She saw tents in Laramie. You know, we were one of those that sprang up along the railroad, serviced the railroad workers. So what do you think there were in those tents but saloons and gambling halls and brothels and a place for some restaurants, but that was about it. So she really came to the Wild West.
At this time in history, women were expected to have a certain role, and that was a passive role. The cult of domesticity was one term for it. They were supposed to be passive, delicate, virtuous, and pious. How does that square with Jane?
I don't know that Jane Ivinson was ever any of those things. I think she knew that was her culture and she needed to do that. She was an English lass, and so she grew up with that, very womanly attributes that she was trying to be very civil. But I think a woman in the West had more freedom. She was able to come out here and use her skills in a broader fashion than women in the East and what were typically expected of women. Jane was able to do a little bit more, and I think she allowed herself to do that. When I talk about Jane Ivinson, I talk about a destiny that this woman thought she had. When she first arrived to this tent city, she said, "I always knew that I wanted a field to labor in which some good could be done, and I realized I had now reached this place." It was a blank canvas. You could make a town, and she did. She helped start the first Sunday school. She got the first preacher into Laramie. She helped gather the ladies for the first Sunday school and Union School. She left a big legacy, even though she didn't think she was going to live here very long. They were headed to California. They were headed to California, and in fact, Edward's letter says, "We'll only be here a short while." And as we know, the Ivinsons made a substantial investment in this little community.
They were here like 46 years in
They were,
actuality.
that's right.
Now, after she arrived, the year after she arrived, 1869, Elizabeth Stanton and Susan B. Anthony established the National Woman Suffrage Association. What do you think, Jane? Would she have joined? Would she have been sympathetic?
I think she was a little hesitant to do that, but what we do know from a speech actually given by Mayor Edward Ivinson, he said that he and Jane campaigned in Cheyenne for that suffrage passage. And that Governor Campbell signed December 10th, 1869 for Wyoming. So they were very involved. And he said in that speech that they had had people to their home to campaign for that. So we know that Jane and Edward were both very supportive of that.
Now that's interesting, not only her, but her husband.
That's right.
They put themselves out there at a time when not everyone felt the same way about women and
again,
voting rights.
I think the West was a blank canvas. I think the West, they could make more forays. They could, have a little more freedom to do something. Very limited population, so who's going to do it if you're not? And who's watching over your shoulder? No one, so maybe we can make these forays into freedom for women, freedoms for women, work for women, establishment of communities. I think the Western woman had more opportunity than those back east.
So what do you think what did Jane do here? What do you think if someone were to ask today, so what does Jane do for Laramie that we can still see today?
Jane Ivenson's legacy is rich. She wanted her husband to have a home for aged ladies, that the pioneer women of Wyoming would not be destitute in their old age. And on Grand Avenue in Laramie, we see the Ivinson Home for Aged Ladies, and that's for any Wyoming woman to have a place, to have a place in their older years. Edward left that in the legacy of his wife. He built it for $100,000, endowed it for $300,000, so you know it is a well taken care of, established organization here in Wyoming. Mm-hmm. And then she wanted their home to be used as a school for girls, those girls on the ranches outside in the region around Laramie and throughout Wyoming who couldn't get into school, that they could come to that beautiful big house and learn manners and etiquette and attend school in Laramie. So that is another legacy. The Ivinson home, the Jane Ivinson Memorial Hall is in a rich legacy for Jane. The schools that we have and the hospital that we have. Mr. Ivinson made a speech after the death of his wife, and he said, "My wife always wanted us to have a hospital that would be serve the city that they love so well." And he always regretted that he didn't do it while she was still living. So it was a big deal.
That's quite a bit.
I think her
for
legacy
one
is
couple,
as much when she passed as in through her life.
Because she passed quite a few years before Edward did.
She died in 1915, and he died in 1928, so yes.
That's right. And it seemed like they were very attuned to each other. She kind of, was she the visionary of the couple, and then he was the one who had the money and acted?
I wish I knew that, Leslie. I don't think so. I think they were a pair. And I think she did for him what he could not do. I think she had circles that he could not go into. But he was a mover and shaker, you know, and a politician and a money man. So if she had an idea, his money probably was put to her ideas.
And what's amazing, too, is that she was 13 when they wed. He was 23, I believe. But yet they had a 61-year marriage.
That's right, here in Laramie, Wyoming. That's right.
She must have been quite the astute and mature young teenager.
I think she was mature. I think she also knew her place. I think he was a man of the old school, although he had bright ideas. I think she knew when to keep quiet, and I think she knew when to speak up. And that's why it made it work, you know?
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, if somebody wanted to find out more about Jane, where would they go?
Come to the Laramie Plains Museum at the historic Ivinson Mansion. We have books on our shelves about Jane Ivinson. There'll be a new one coming out there'll be two new ones coming out in 2013, one by Kim Viner. We have a very knowledgeable historian on the Ivinson, Kim Viner, who has written two books so far, and will write a third in 2013. And then the museum itself will put out another one on the Ivinsons, and you'll have more history on Jane.
What do you think was her proudest achievement? Any thoughts?
Coming to the West, making something in this country that was so vast and so primitive, really, to her, an English girl, and then living in the very populated and progressive areas in the western part of the eastern part of the United States. I think coming to the West and making a difference, and she certainly did.
Okay, interesting. Thank you, Mary. This has been a great treat.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you for having me.